All right, what are we talking about today? Today, we are talking about cross-examination, everybody's favorite part of the debate. And we're just going to go over some basic ideas and strategies today so that hopefully you can think of how to be really good at cross-examination when you get to your debates. So, first, the basics. Why do we even do cross-examination? What's it for? We could have a debate where people get up and give speeches and we never do a single piece of cross-examination. We could do that, but we don't, and we don't for a reason. And then how do we do a good cross-examination? So why do we do cross-examination? Well, cross-examination is the only part of the debate where both teams actually get to interact with each other. So instead of being like a robot who just like plans ahead, gets all your arguments ready, and just reads everything through every debate, we have this period where it's a little more dynamic and chaotic, and teams can ask each other questions to help expose flaws or set up arguments, things like that. Cross-examination is also important because it can help show the judge the difference between the affirmative and negative positions. In cross-examination, you can ask really basic, simple questions that show how different both sides of the story are. So cross-examination helps you really get to the core of the debate really easily. And something to remember is that cross-examination is about the arguments in the debate, not the debaters. So you shouldn't be asking cross-examination questions about another debater's style, or like, let's say they're stuttering or like they mispronounce a word or like something like that. That's not really what cross-examination is about. It's not like, oh, why don't you know what this word is? Like, who cares? It's about the arguments and about what arguments each side are making and how they relate to each other. So keep it at the argument level. Along with that, who is cross-examination for? So you might think, if you're the person asking questions, that cross-examination is for you. Like it's a time for you to figure out what's going on in the debate, what arguments the other team read, stuff like that. And that is true to some degree. Like cross-examination is for you to catch up on that stuff. But cross-examination is actually there for the judge. Just like everything else in the debate, at the end of the debate, the judge is going to choose which team wins and why. So cross-examination is a time where you can help the judge figure out what's going on and show the judge which arguments are involved. So cross-examination is really for the judge. It's not for you or your partner or even the other team. It's you do cross-examination to help the judge out. And that's even though they're like the only person in the debate who's not interacting during the cross-examination, it actually is for them. So if that's what cross-examination is, then how do we do it well? I think most people know what it is, but how do you actually do it well? There's basically three things you can do in cross-examination. People abbreviate cross-examination as CX a lot. First thing you can do is help clarify arguments. So let's say you're the person asking questions and you missed who the author of an argument was, or you missed the main idea of an argument. You can just ask the other team, like, hey, who was the author who said this thing? Or what was your argument, about solvency on the advantage? Something like that. You can just straight up ask them and figure it out. And that might seem contradictory with what I just said about cross-examination being for the judge, because here you're helping clarify an argument like something you missed, and you're also giving the other team an opportunity to talk about why their argument is so good, or why their author is so good, or what the facts are, or something like that. And that's true. You are giving them an opportunity and doing things that might hurt you in the long run. But if you're confused about an argument, the judge is probably also confused about it. So it's helpful for you to ask the other team what they're talking about so that the judge can understand the other team's arguments, and then they'll understand your responses better. Because if your arguments really are better, then they need to understand what the other team is saying to understand why your arguments are better. And if you don't help clarify these arguments, what might happen is that you don't know what the arguments are, you don't know what's going on, but the judge and the other team do. So how could you possibly win a debate where the judge and the other team know what's going on, but you don't know what's going on? Not going to happen, right? So it's a good idea. If you have big questions, get them clarified in cross-examination. If they're really small questions, like, what's this acronym, or, some like, how many cards did you read on this or something, that's not really that important. Remember, you want to try to figure out what the arguments are and how they relate to the story. And figuring out little small things like that, probably not really going to help you. Second thing you can do is help point out flaws of reasoning, facts, logic in the opponent's argument. So let's say they read two pieces of arguments that like contradict each other, that can't go together, but they don't realize it. You could just come out and ask, hey, don't these two things contradict each other? But that's probably not going to work really well. What you'd probably have to do is ask them to explain one part of one argument and another part of another argument. And then in your speech, you can come back and say that those two things contradict each other in your next speech. So in cross-ex, you just ask questions that help you make the speech or help show the judge. Like if the judge is paying attention, they'll probably realize that, you know, there's some sort of reasoning or factual problem in the other team's arguments. Okay, the third thing you can do is help set up arguments that you want to make in your next speech. So let's say the affirmative is reading their case and they say, oh, you know, our plan will never be passed because like the president doesn't like it, Congress doesn't like it, blah, blah, blah. And you have a piece of evidence saying that their plan actually did pass this morning, right? So you want to ask them questions and you know you're going to use that argument in your speech, but you're not at your speech yet, you're in a cross-examination. So you want to ask them questions about that evidence they read. You want to ask like, you know, how old is it? Has there been anything that's happened in the meantime? Is there anything that's changed in the world that would make that piece of evidence, you know, less true or untrue? And they might give all different types of responses, but you want them to really say those things clearly to the judge so that when you get into your speech, you can say, listen, the affirmative said these three things about why their evidence is true. Our evidence conclusively shows that that is not the case. It proves them false. Therefore, we know our piece of evidence is stronger. And because it's stronger, we know the plan passed. So therefore, there's no reason to vote affirmative because the plan has already passed. So that's how you can help set up arguments that you want to make in your speech. A lot of teams will also do this like in novice or JV or varsity if you want to set up your off-case position. Like let's say you're a novice and you want to read a disadvantage that says that, you know, when the government spends too much money, then they have to take money from other places like education or healthcare. We've used this example before. So in the cross-examination, if you want to set that argument up, you're going to have to ask things like, do you have any evidence that says how much the plan would cost? Or do you have any evidence that says where the money for the plan would come from? Or does the money for the plan come from already existing funds, or does the government have to make new funds for the plan? And these shouldn't be random questions. They should be questions that help you set up your arguments, but also questions related to their arguments. So if possible, pay attention during the other team's speech and write down things that they said that you want to ask them questions about, because more than likely, one of their pieces of evidence is going to say something that relates to the argument you want to make. So you want to go back in cross-examination and say, hey, this piece of evidence you read, it said this part. Can you explain that a little bit more about, you know, why that's the case or where it comes from? And then they're going to be like, yeah, we spend so much money. It's going to be such a great thing. It's going to be awesome. And then boom, you get them with the disad and debate's over in the 1NC. You already won. Okay. Other notes about cross-examination. Remember, in cross-examination, it's not about being aggressive or posturing or like being intimidating with the other team. That's not what good cross-examination looks like. If you think about cross-examination like in a court or somewhere like professional, the lawyers aren't like screaming at the people that they're trying to cross-examine, right? It wouldn't make any sense. And the judge doesn't want to hear that, right? So you should try to be respectful, courteous, professional, and ask questions in a way that gets you the answers you want, and give answers in a way that is helpful for yourself and the judge to understand the argument. But it's not about talking over each other, and it's not about being mean or being aggressive. It's about taking your turn to be reasonable about what you're saying and get through things. And remember, you only have 2 minutes in cross-examination. So you want to keep your questions relatively short, and you want to keep your answers relatively short. Otherwise, the judge is going to think that you're just talking to talk and you don't have anything to say. So if you try to take a bunch of time or be aggressive or like, you know, stomp all over the other team and not let them say anything, you might think you're doing a good thing because you're taking time and you're getting your arguments out, but you're just going to look really bad in the end. It's going to look like you don't have anything to say and that all you have is just intimidation. And no judge wants to judge that or vote for you if you do that, right? So try to stay nice, stay serious, stay professional, and do as best as you can. And in the end, if you're the person asking questions, you actually want your opponent to talk because you want them to say things that are going to give you arguments that you want to make. So if you're trying to set up an argument, it's actually better to have your opponent talk more because they're going to give you more things to link to your argument. So if you think that asking a question and then not letting your opponent talk very much is a good strategy, that actually shows how bad your question is. Because if your question is good, you want your opponents to talk because they're going to dig their own grave, right? But if your question isn't very good, then it's going to be really easy for your opponents to answer and you won't want them to talk about it at all. So it's really up to you to find the right questions and make sure that they're, phrased in a way that makes sense, that's going to get you the answers you want. And that way you won't have to like cut off your opponents or try to talk over them or anything. They're going to give you exactly what you want and you're going to seem really smart and nice and the judges are going to love what you're doing in cross-examination. So take a look at your evidence as the negative and think about what your strategy is as the negative and write down probably 5 or 10 questions that you could ask that are going to help you make your arguments. If you're the affirmative and you're watching this video, think about what arguments could the neg potentially make against your affirmative and how are you going to ask questions to help prove that that's not the case, right? So look through their evidence, maybe even look through the evidence and write one question based on each piece of evidence if you want to be really hardcore. Because that way, if the other team reads a piece of evidence, no matter what they read, you're going to have a question related to it. So you're always going to be ready for cross-examination and you're always going to be able to make the arguments you want to make. And that's high tier, big brain debate strategy. So again, be nice, take a look at your arguments, make sure you're ready for cross-examination, and overall, have a good time. Make sure that your cross-examination is fun, that you're interacting, and that you're getting down to the important points that are in cross-examination. Good luck and enjoy your debates.